RestoreCorps, if we were to start with the mission statement, RestoreCorps exists to eradicate human trafficking through empowering survivors, equipping communities, and seeking justice through systemic change. But the story, of course, is so much more than that. I personally started working with survivors of human trafficking when I lived in Southeast Asia. And I think when I returned to the States in 2010, many people then, and to some extent now, really believe that human trafficking doesn't happen here, or at least it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen in any of our neighborhoods. And if it does happen, it's because people are coming across the borders, or somebody from Southeast Asia has been trafficked over. And yet the story is that there's not a community in Memphis that hasn't been touched by human trafficking. And even the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released a report in 2011 showing that, why did I quote this quote all the time. I'm gonna have to come back to that. That's really weird. I know that you can cut down. That's why I'm yeah. So in 2011, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released a report showing that the majority of Tennessee's 95 counties already had documented cases of sex trafficking in the 24 months prior to the release of that study. And that is exceptionally far from anything anyone would have thought at that point in our community, in our state, that there was more prevalence or more counties with documented human trafficking activity at that point in Tennessee's history than there was with documented gang activity. And that's just not the narrative that most of us realize is happening. So the story of RestoreCorps is really, how can we come along survivors as they are identified and offer any kind of combination of services and hope that they want at that point in their life. We do have residential housing and safe housing. We have 2 different safe houses, but the majority of survivors actually opt to live in the community and try to return to something that feels as normal as possible, as fast as possible. And so our team walks alongside them towards supportive services, whether it's as simple as getting an ID back, or the hard work of doing therapy. And even this week, we've been hearing from some of our in-house therapists that just about breakthroughs, how so many survivors begin to kind of get jumpy when you start really digging in and getting close to something that's hard. And if they stick through, they just kind of turn a corner of enjoy and peace. And I think that that's what we are here for. And yet we're not really okay with just doing services for victims, but we want to help our community kind of remove those layers and remove those things, those narratives that tell us human trafficking doesn't happen here. And so we do a lot of trainings. We do a lot of just general awareness in the community, but we also do very robust trainings, like specific to a specific profession, whether it's Department of Education, required training for teachers, or Department of Correction, required trainings for correction officers, or specific training for airport police officers, because the kind of red flags that an airport police officer is going to see is drastically different than a teacher. A teacher is going to see a slow change of a juvenile, of a teenager in one of their classes over a period of time, maybe 6 months, a year, et cetera. An airport police officer just has those fractions of moments coming in and going through, like watching a group of people going through customs or going through security and boarding a plane. And so the red flags are different. And so we really aim to do a lot of trainings because we want to change the ability for human trafficking victims and traffickers to hide in plain sight. But then also we know that the problem will still exist if it's not, we know that the problem will still exist if it is not risky to exploit people in our communities. And so we also work on system change, legislation, and how some of these different kind of arrests are treated in our judicial system. Because if people think that there's no consequence to go out and want to pay for sex with vulnerable people in our community, then they're going to continue to do it. So a lot of what we do is work on how do we increase the risk for the buyer, increase the risk of the trafficker, increase the availability and consistency and sustainability of services to the victim, so that eventually I work myself out of a job is really like the story. And we very intentionally say that we aim to be a navigator or an ally or a support for survivors rather than language like rescue or save, even though that's kind of the language that is typically used for human trafficking victims and counter trafficking work. But we've just seen over time that to immediately and as quickly as possible honor the dignity of these victims on their road to survivorship, we have to use language that says, you're strong, you're resilient, you are already a world changer in your own right, but maybe I know things that you don't know about things in our community, resources in our community, paths that you can take. And so let me just walk alongside you as if like I'm holding a lantern and just kind of lighting a path so you know a step that's possible for you to take. I love my city. I think, so I've actually worked at a local restaurant for a long time in the creation of RestoreCorps. But even before, I went and lived in Southeast Asia. And one of the managers there, it's a local restaurant beloved by many in Memphis called Huey's. And one of the managers there a couple years ago just called me Miss 901. And whenever any of our guests would come in and would be asking questions about where should we go for family fun or where should we go to see something, he would always, even if it's not my table, he would grab me and say, you need to speak to Miss 901, because I just love my town. I think that when you grow up in Memphis, typically one of two things happen. Either there's that you find yourself around kind of friends and thought life and conversations that say maybe this happens with any town, but like, I can't wait to leave this place. This is nothing but a dead hole, et cetera. And I had a lot of people like that around me. When I was in college, I stayed in Memphis for college for a number of different reasons. And there was just this angst that I heard from a number of people during that kind of season of my life. It was like, I can't wait to get out of this place. And I never necessarily felt that. I always thought that I would leave for a period of time, but I never thought I can't wait until the day or this place is terrible. And I think it's because I do get to do, and I always have been able to do kind of unique work and see a unique picture of the world through Memphis or a unique picture of Memphis through the world. And I mean, my first job growing up was actually at the Dyslexia Foundation of Memphis. And so that is families, individuals who are trying to learn a new way to learn, right? Like there's someone in their family or a student has been diagnosed with dyslexia, and actually Einstein was dyslexic. So it doesn't mean anything about like whether someone is smart or not smart, but they just learn different. And so that got to be my first actual, paycheck kind of job after babysitting. And then my next paycheck kind of job, so to speak, if that's the language that we should have, is working at a tattoo shop. A local tattoo shop, also like owned and run by a local family here, a son and mother. And I never in 1 million years would have thought that I would have found myself working in a tattoo shop. And then I've worked at Huey's now for 18 years, even though I've built RestoreCore, but even RestoreCore wouldn't be here without the generosity of Huey's, or even the humans that I've worked there with along the years. Like, there would be times that I would be heading into a shift and Channel 5 would call because there was a human trafficking bus the night before, and hey, we'd like to come interview you today. And I'm in a t-shirt and jeans because I'm going in to serve tables or bartend. And I'd walk in and say, okay, team, friends, colleagues, coworkers, Channel 5 is going to be here at 11. So I'm going to help open, but then right at 11, I'm going to stand outside and it'll take maybe, 10 minutes. Can somebody cover my section? Like, how do we all feel about this? And my coworkers over the years just were kind and generous in their time and in their efforts. And I would come back from something like that and hear, this table has this table has this. I've already swiped the credit card, and just teaming together. One of them sweetly told me, Rachel, I can't do the work that you do, but I can help you do the work that you do. Like when he was covering my section one day. And I think that that's so much in so many places, the heart of Memphis. Like, how can each of us in our different neighborhoods and our different walks of life and our different careers constantly say, man, with all of us participating in community, we're all better for it. And there's this, Memphis is known for what, over the last decade to 15 years, this idea of this grit and grind, this pride in being gritty, this pride in being bound together. And even I think that you see it everywhere, in so many different things in Memphis. I just got off the phone with, I thought I was calling someone who has been a cheerleader, a prayer warrior, a generous human towards the cause of releasing captives and fighting human trafficking. And so I just felt compelled to call him today. And he is helping me start to see a vision of another organization doing completely different work in a different part of the city, and yet how we might need to work together in just this incredible, empowering, collective impact kind of way. And I wouldn't have known that if this other random person wasn't a cheerleader of both of these initiatives happening in drastically different places in our city. And yet that's Memphis. Constantly people are connected and sharing the stories of one another, which kind of fans a flame or lights another catalyst to another story or another path for our community to be stronger, to be better, to be whole. And I think that there's this small whisper at different points and really loud if it's Grizzly playoffs in the FedEx Forum. But this idea that we're all in it together, and man, what a ride. When I think of Memphis in the future, I just look forward to a day where it becomes impossible for any of us to make giant sweeping statements or assumptions about another community or any of our pockets of Memphis or our Shelby County area. And I think, so a couple months ago, I had a knock at the door and I answered it, and someone asked me, what's the one thing you would change about Memphis? And I don't really remember what I said in response, but I do remember that what the person thought I was going to say was crime. It's like this assumption that he clearly, that's the assumption, like that Memphis has this terrible crime. And I'm not saying that we don't, but I will say that being in a very specific place in our community, fighting a very, very violent type of crime, I don't think of crime when I think of Memphis. And I mean, this week we were on an undercover operation for human trafficking, and yet still that's not what I think of when I think of Memphis. I don't think of crime. I don't think of violence when I'm seeing it really firsthand on any given day. And yet what I think about is hope, is joy, is teamwork, is collaboration, is grit and grind, and I don't know, kindness. I actually think about kindness because even an honor, I mean, even for the survivors that we see, or I mean, at times we have to call them victims because they are, and especially on scene in an undercover operation, they're absolutely victims at that point, but they're also already survivors at that point. And yet, even when we have to, we ask our intake questions and we try to dialogue what led them to that moment of that day where police have scared the bejesus out of them because they've done what's literally called a takedown, like that they've busted through a door to try to rescue someone, and now they're kind of shimmied over to my team to talk. And in that moment, and in any of the other moments that we get to chat with the survivors, we get to chat with law enforcement, and we get to chat with people in our community kind of willing to put their eyes on this injustice, I just see extreme kindness, extreme favor of one another, honor that somebody, that a victim in that moment would choose to believe, even in conflict with like everything that they know about the world, right? Like in that moment, they were at a hotel or at a police station, and they are there because people have exploited them and exploited their vulnerabilities and promised things that were lies or manipulation. And yet still in that moment, for a victim to say, I just didn't understand, or I didn't know, or he knows where my family lives, or she was just saying that she could help us buy school supplies for my younger siblings. Like there's this leverage that somebody finds, and yet who am I that these victims would honor me with their narrative? Or who are we that somebody would be so kind to share their story? Share, that people would share their fear, and people would even literally nothing in that moment could tell them otherwise. They still, for a brief moment, choose to believe in hope that we are who we say we are, when, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like somebody has lied, somebody's manipulated oftentimes, like that they are who they say they are, or that their intentions were truly pure. And yet there's still some kind of resilience of spirit that they hope again. And I think what I would want to see in Memphis in the future is that those are the stories that are shared the loudest, because if we only share, if all of us think that the crime is everywhere and that we have to incarcerate young people to protect us because we're supposed to live in some kind of fear, then fear is exactly what we'll get. Then hiding in our homes is exactly what we'll get. But there's this book called From Foreign to Familiar, and it talks about how there's hot climate and cold climates in the world. And this is increasingly untrue because more and more cultures are turning, quote unquote, the way that the book presents it as cold climate, where this idea that what you're caring about is like your nuclear family, and you go in your house, you like pull in your carport or your garage, and you close the garage down below, and like the people that you're feeding today are the people in your like four walls and in your backyard. But a hot climate culture is you come home and you're on the front porch, and your whatever food you have is food for the whole of the community. And if you would never even dream about walking into kind of a group setting and not having enough potato chips for everybody, if you don't have enough for everybody, then you don't bring the potato chips. Like, it's like that what is good for the community, like the whole, is more valued than what is good for the individual. And I think that that's what I want. I think that just this like reckoning again, or this readjustment of being front porch neighbors who say, how can I be in the world with you again and participate in the goodness? What is the goodness that I have to offer? There's actually a guy that's originally from Memphis that he was actually, the book is, I've just forgotten the name of the book, but his name is Michael Rhodes. And he talks about this idea of like, what would it be like in the world, or even in the way that any of us doing ministry, even like RestoreCorps, doing service-oriented careers in our community, that we do it like a potluck rather than a soup kitchen, rather than this kind of like industrial funnel of mechanism where somebody's standing behind a plexiglass doling out in service, even if somebody is hungry and they need the hot soup or they need the bread. But what would it be like if we kind of do away with that model altogether and instead have the most giant farm table, if we will, that has benches for miles, and a potluck as a community that says like, what do you have? What do I have? And how can we like lay it on the table, submit it to one another, and all be better for it? Yeah, I think that's what I want. And I think in small places throughout our community and in large, I think that that's already happening, but I don't know that it's happening all the places. That would be awesome. But I also don't know that it is the story that any of us know is happening in our community. And so, yeah, that's what I want. I want our community to go back to being, or to be maybe for the first time in some places, like front porch neighbors sharing a potluck.